Welcome back to another episode of the Loco Fit Show, where we redefine what healthy means to you. I'm your host, Lauren Conlon, and this week I'm joined by Coach Hannah. Hello.
Hello.
And we are going to be talking all about working through low back pain. And as a chiropractor and also an athlete, you are very familiar with low back pain.
Yes, yes.
And I want to just run through first just kind of some of the stats, right? Because I think a lot of people listening have probably dealt with low back pain, but like the numbers are actually really staggering if you look at like the statistics behind it.
Oh, absolutely. Low back pain is like the most prevalent, I would say, like musculoskeletal pain out there. Recent stats already said like around like in the mid 80 percentile of like people will experience low back pain at some point in their lives, which is insane. And for like even from that, that's worldwide. That's not just, in America or just like, America and Europe or things along those lines. Everybody will experience it in some way, shape, or form. And then and even from there, from the stats themselves, there's so many things that can cause low back pain too. So you always have to like put that into put that into the equation as well.
Yeah, because it's definitely like some people, of course, will, have like herniated disc or have like a big accident. But I would say that probably, and correct me if I'm wrong, but more people probably have this kind of like chronic nagging, like other issues that kind of like create low back pain, or do you see no, like there is more kind of like acute injuries and that's why someone's seeing back pain? Like what are you seeing in practice?
No, like in practice, it's like we call it non-specific mechanical low back pain. And that I from that, like that is typically like the most like diagnosed, like I would say like code, like medical code. Really just because unless like you get advanced imaging, which we'll probably go into that later, like no one's like you can't like figure it out for the most part of just like where it's coming from. Unless it was like, okay, yes, you're in like a huge accident and that's what like precipitated it and you did have like disc herniations or fractures or something along those lines. Or, like sometimes from there it's like, all right, there's just like so many structures that like go into play that for most of the time. And I feel like even just like most of the time too, a lot of people that I see for low back pain, no one can figure out a specific event. They're just like, hey, I've had this for the past such and such months, such and such years. And you try to, and like most people like have tried to like figure out like a, inciting incident, but a lot of people are like, no, it just has gradually like come on and just gotten like steadily and steadily worse.
For sure. I would say that that's a lot of what I hear from clients, like it's just like, oh, it comes and goes, but it's never, for a lot of people, it's never bad enough for them to just like be taken out completely, and that's kind of where I feel like a lot of the injuries like that, would you call it non-specific, like those kinds
Yeah.
of things are so tough because it's like, yeah, they don't hurt bad enough, and I have to stop, but I have to adjust things. But then, like, over time, they really can compound. And then it's like, you're doing one random thing, and then you're like, whoa, why did I hurt my back? But it's like the past 10 years have been leading to this, right? And then,
Right.
of course, we're so much more sedentary now, just in general, as like a population throughout like the entire world. Of course, some places more than others, but I mean, for most people, they are, sitting in either cars or public transportation, or they're sitting, at a desk. And some people, I mean, when we get some clients, people, if they're not on top of their step count, right, they might be hitting 3,000 steps a day, and it's like one of those things where it's like if you're doing that for years and then, you train a few times and maybe you move wrong, a few times, like that's how easy it can escalate, right? Like,
Yeah, no, like that's it. We have become so, like so sedentary and like, I mean, our lives nowadays, it doesn't demand like the manual labor that like we used to have to do, and that that our bodies need, and it's to a point of our bodies need exposure to different ranges of motion. I mean, just movement in general, and being loaded. I mean, loaded in some way, whether it's like time under tension or just like, hey, like sometimes like our bodies need to be able to lift something in when your back is flexed, which people are like, oh my gosh, don't like lift like that. But no, like our bodies are going to freak out if they don't have those exposures too, which typically you do like get in like some, in daily life, like sometimes like, you see like the stamp on a box that says lift with care and says like lift with your legs, which yes, like please do. But at the same time, like you still like you need to like not be like in fear of like certain motions that have been deemed bad, when in reality it's like if you have like just some exposure you should be fine. But like you said, like a lot of people, I mean, we sit all day long, which is, I mean, those for like that like is actually a lot of force on your spine, and no one talks about that as well. And with it's like, and if you just like get this constant load from sitting all the time, you don't get movement from like, from walking, getting like adequate number of steps in for the day. Our bodies just go into lockdown mode just because like since they haven't gotten that exposure to movement, then like the body is kind of just like just shuts down and says like, hey, I'm going to protection mode because I'm not familiar with the territory that we're going in.
That makes a lot of sense. And I guess I've never conceptualized it as sitting creates load like on your spine, but that that's so interesting. Like I've never
Yeah,
really thought of it that way.
it's not going to be the same as like running or something like that, but I mean, from laying down to laying on the floor to anything along those lines, a lot of times, just even if we do have like correct posture, I mean, gravity just like affects us differently. If we're standing, at least like we have like some load going like to other places, where sitting it's pretty much just like, hey, it's going on the spine and then right on the pelvis and then kind of stops there. So
Yeah.
just more force is being pressed down.
Yeah, that is so true. And I've just like I said, I've just never really conceptualized it. And then especially too, and this we're not talking about like cervical spine here, but when people's necks are in like weird positions from like typing and like there's just so many things with sitting that are, even if you have the most ergonomic everything, like it's just one of
Yeah.
those things that like repeated movements like that, again, whether they're training, like which is good, or they're repeated movements like, typing something using a mouse, like looking weird, like that's going to have a negative effect too. So yeah, so low back pain is pretty common, right? But like you would say, a lot of people come in and it's kind of this non-specific. So I guess walk me through if someone just comes in and they are again outside of, hey, I just got in a car accident, hey, I was lifting something and I heard a pop, like anything outside of that, which they would probably be sent right for imaging. Someone just comes in, I've been dealing with this low back pain, what would be kind of the steps before you go to imaging? Because I know you talked about not everybody necessarily needs that, so like what would that look like first?
Of course, like we'll just like go over their history, like maybe try to pinpoint something, seeing like their activity level then, or just like, yeah, their activity level in the present, even their activity level in like in their past, if it has been higher or lower, depending on the person. And then after that, really just, I mean, diving into exam, looking at it's like, okay, like what is their range of motion like of their spine? After that, it's all right, let's do some muscle testing. Not just even just like of okay, like loading like spinal flexion or spinal extension and those like movements, but let's look at core stability, which I do want to like dive into like later. But all right, can they actually like activate their core? Do they know like what a proper brace is? Do people have like access or awareness of like all aspects of their core and not just like their, abs or even like transverse abdominis or obliques, which like, I mean, depending on like the just like level of the person, like people like think like, okay, yeah, you can do sit-ups, or then like going more into depth, be like, okay, no, like let's do like planks, side planks. But I mean, what about their diaphragm? Do they breathe properly? That's like technically like the top of your core. Do they know going into like, I mean, both like males and females, but do they know how to control their pelvic floor? I mean, that's the bottom of their core. So those are like also different areas to look into. And then for me, I actually do go like down like to the hip, seeing if they have like correct range of motion there, and adequate strength. And then I'll even address the foot and ankle too to see like, hey, like if, I mean, for those people, it's more so like, hey, like if they are runners or there are active individuals, it could be just coming from, okay, there's not enough force, like force absorption at the foot and ankle, that's just going up the chain and affecting their low back. So, and those like other two things do depend on like, all right, probably the activity of the individual. But if it is like, um I will probably also look into like sensory testing. That's a chiropractic thing of saying like, hey, like, all right, making sure they feel like a brush of like my fingers the same from side to side. And then I'll check reflexes as well, just to make sure like those are more so like disc specific things. To say like, hey, just ruling it out, making sure that we can find a cause. Saying like, hey, like there could be some disc involvement that is causing the pain.
That's yeah, I've definitely had that happen before. Like when you were saying that, I'm like, oh, I've had that happen like with chiropractors before. But it's so interesting. I love that you talked about it might not just be from the back, right? You are going to look at the hips, you are going to look at the foot and the ankle because all of that is so like I mean, it's literally your body is all working as one, right? So like if those things are off, and especially in that example, if someone is like a runner, and they have this repeated bad movement, well, that could be, of course, affecting their back. Because I think a lot of people think of like back pain as kind of like you said, like you're lifting something wrong, or like, oh yeah, anybody who deadlifts really heavy, they're gonna have a bad back. And like you could, you know what I mean? Like there's a probably a higher percentage because you are if you're doing something, like powerlifting or Olympic lifting or even CrossFit, like you're going to be doing movements over and over again that are like for years and they're going to be heavy, so yes, is there a higher chance? Potentially. But a lot of times it could just be coming from these other things like wrong movement patterns or sitting too much and not having this core stability. So there are so many reasons as to why it could be a back pain issue. But so say like you go through and you diagnose all that, and would you then typically is there a set time, generally speaking, where you're like, all right, let's do this treatment for X amount of weeks or months before, if it hasn't subsided, let's go do other testing. Like when would you maybe make that change? Because I'm just thinking of people maybe who've been listening who are like, I've been going to PT or I've been doing these things and it hasn't improved. Kind of, I guess, is like a what next? Should they get imaging? Like I know a lot of people talk about stem cells and different things like that. So like where does that all fit in? You're not just gonna like say, oh, I have back pain and like go get that done, but I guess a timeline that would be recommended from you, generally speaking.
Yeah. I mean, I would say like if I'm working with somebody for like 4 to 6 weeks and they haven't had like really any change in symptoms, or like if like someone like comes to me for like a second opinion and says that as well, um I would probably say like, hey, let's do get advanced imaging, like try like see it's like get an MRI to see if like there is like something more at play. And I mean, a lot of times it's like, hey, like, if I just want to tell people, it's like if you see like a disc herniation, that doesn't necessarily mean like, oh, you like have to get surgery right now. Like that's not like the end all be all. But to say like, hey, like, maybe just like some of the things that you have been doing could be tailored a little bit differently to address this. So that's me. It's like if there hasn't been market improvement, saying like, all right, at least like I would say like probably like 30 to 50% better with in the span of 4 to 6 weeks, like, all right, we need to probably like get imaging and seeing if like we missed something. Whether it's like, hey, like maybe there is some like bone involvement, again, like a more severe disc herniation. Um, that needs to be tailored a little bit differently, rehab wise.
All right, so yeah, so definitely if you guys are in this position, you've been trying things, there's not any kind of improvement, then it might be time to order the MRI. And I know that those can get pricey just depending on insurance and stuff, but I know that like um I've gone through and like I remember one time I was having like this whole I was having glute pain, like literally like for I mean, well, I had it for like years, but it was like months and months and months of it. It was not getting better. So finally, I was like, I'm gonna like, I need to see like what is going on. You know what I mean? Like, is there something in here? You know? And I actually did like I was able to pay for it like out of pocket, which was nice. I mean, it is expensive, but so there are options if you want to do things that are out of pocket. If you are just like you don't really have a great insurance provider, whatever. So there are options for this kind of testing. It's not again not cheap, but it is possible to get that done, especially if it could be something to then you have a better understanding of, oh, okay, well, and like you said, it doesn't mean that it's a death sentence. I know people who have herniated discs who are able to train really, really hard, and
Yeah.
that's just part of their life, and they've built up things around it. So I guess that's a perfect segue to talk about kind of more of just like core training in general. And like I know you wanted to dive into like what does that mean, and how that really affects like how does your core affect low back pain?
So, I mean, everybody is like with core stability, it just makes sure that your just spine is stable to produce mobility everywhere else, whether it's a deadlift, a squat, running, just in everyday life. It's just making sure that it's like we can produce the movements that it's like that we can. And if we have a unstable core, most of the range of motion everywhere else does shut down to a certain degree. And just because it's like, all right, if we can't like just like stay tight with, I mean, where like our extremities come from, then we're not in like a safe space to be able to move. And then especially if you add load on top of that. So when addressing core stability, like I do think like I was like I do think planks are valuable. I do think just like any sort of static motion, whether like you can do like kettlebell front rack holds, you can even like holding a barbell. I mean, or just even carrying dumbbells, like to say from like the dumbbell rack to like wherever you need to go. Like all of that requires core stability. I just think sometimes that people just neglect some of the other things, whether it's just learning how to breathe properly, just making sure that like just diaphragm is like able to move. A lot of people like I think just breathe shallow, they don't focus on those things. And from there it's like their rib cage gets stiff, they're having to breathe more so through their shoulders, and they don't, it's not to say like I want everybody to belly breathe. I just want people to be able to just like breathe without having to just use the accessory muscles around. And then from a pelvic floor standpoint, like I think it's very valuable to like address that. And with like, I mean, both the diaphragm and the pelvic floor, a lot of times I think like people are like, oh my gosh, like I have to do like Kegels every day. Like even if like, like I don't, or like other pelvic floor exercises. And like from that standpoint, I said like, no, like it doesn't have to be like that. But something that we use in the clinic that's like I think people just find it funny but valuable is like during like certain like we have like one core exercise. It's kind of like a hollow hold, and we say, oh, it's like you're gonna hold your pee and hold your fart, and they laugh, of course. but it does give them just the slight awareness they need to just like this kind of just like activate those muscles just a little bit more. It's like we address the diaphragm, we address the pelvic floor while using typical core stability exercises that you'll see like in the gym.
Yeah, the breathing one is like most people, I mean, I'm definitely no expert here. Like I recognize that I've made improvements there, but like it is not natural for most people to breathe like through their diaphragm, like to breathe properly. Like it's really, and maybe not, I don't know. I don't, I've met a lot of people who don't breathe properly. And it's just one of those things that you just don't even really think about, obviously, because you're just breathing. But when you actually like sit down and like try to work on that, like it is really hard. Like,
No, I mean, I have issues with that, to this day, just trying to like breathe properly. And I think it's also just like really if people like they're like, okay, why do I need to like focus on this? It's also just like a good introductory thing to do like in rehab to say if like,
mhm,
hey, like if you are like in this place of low back pain where things are hurting, also just being able to like diaphragmatically breathe, it just it turns on that parasympathetic nervous system. It can just reduce the fight or flight that like bodies have like when they are in pain too. So I do
mhm.
think it's a very valuable thing to like do just so like your body's in a better state to do rehab. It can actually reduce pain, and you're not overstimulated all the time.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the reasons that I wanted to start incorporating it more, like not even just from a pain perspective, but just from like a knowing like, all right, I want to tap more into the parasympathetic state. And also again, to your point, that is going to help with, any kind of any of the drills and the training that, you guys are doing. But then also just in general, kind of like your day-to-day life. And pain is so fascinating. So let's walk through that a little bit because to my understanding, like the current literature is just very like vague on understanding like pain and like its response and like how that incorporates like with injuries and stuff. So is there anything that you think would be really helpful to talk about here? Because at least from my knowledge, understanding like pain is still kind of this like elusive thing that we still don't really understand always.
Yeah, I mean, no, like I think like in the past probably like 20, 25 years or so, like pain science like has been like kind of like on the rise in the like musculoskeletal care field. And I mean, what like I typically tell patients is pain is like maybe there was an insulting injury or something like that, like some cause, but our it's like our we have tons of different nerve fibers in our bodies, and they are insulated with a little fat layer that actually speeds up the nerve signals. So to say like, all right, me like moving my finger in space right now, that this being aware of the movement is, or even just like, okay, me sitting here on the ground, those nerve fibers are the fastest. So it's those vibrations also like very high on this list, which is why like Theraguns, like those like type of I mean, I guess like modalities or recovery tools um are like out there because it's like, okay, those are going to be perceived by the brain first. There's a huge spectrum, and then at the end, it's actually pain nerve fibers. They're actually one of the slowest nerve fibers like in our bodies. So with pain, a lot of times, like that's why I brought up just like being like we don't move as much, and just like our body doesn't have sense of different range of motions. So like a lot of times, like if you just turn those like nerves, quote unquote, on or just stimulate them a little bit more, those nerves are going to be um just perceived rather than the pain ones. So if you don't move, if you don't expose yourself to these ranges of motion or just bring like awareness of like certain parts of like of your body, a lot of times like those pain signals are just like, I mean, the nerves are like always on and they're always going to like be bringing some sort of signal. So if it's like if you don't like move in different ways, that like that can also like bring upon pain. It's really just because like there's no other like nerve signal coming from that part of the body. So you're perceiving these pain nerves. So you can perceive pain without like having like an inciting incident. Like maybe there is like some like inflammation like globally or something along those lines, but it's really like, hey, like your body needs some awareness of that area and it has no choice but to perceive the pain ones.
Yeah, that's so it's so fascinating, like just understanding the link between, like you said, all of the neurons and the like things are going to fire anyway, right? So like that's super interesting. And then also I think we get into a place, and I don't know if there's any literature on this, but um when you're kind of conditioned to expect pain, is that like a thing that people talk about in the research or in practice? Because like I know that for me, like if I've had injuries, right, that are pretty chronic, and like you're almost expecting like every time you do this it's going to hurt, so like it's like, is it there because it, like I'm expecting it, or is it actually there, like it's really hard to like tease those things out because there's almost this like expectation of like whatever is going to happen is like is there. I've at least experienced that. I don't know if that's something that other people, you guys see kind of in practice or not.
No, like I definitely see that like have seen that and that comes into play as well. Like I think that comes into like the more like psychological aspect which does affect like all nerve signals. So
Oh yeah.
if like you're because I mean just the brain is so powerful. It's like if your body is just like so used to it that you're just like, oh, whenever I do this, I'm going to have pain, then like your body's like, oh, you're gonna have pain then. It's
Hmm.
like, like it I mean, I don't want to put it like black and white like that, but like in
Yeah.
the end, it's like I mean, it's so powerful. So like even when I like address people's rehab and I like that's why like I mean, it's like it's finding like the an entry point that is like if they're not like if people aren't at like the the ground level, it's like I try it's like and you're like somewhere in the spectrum of returning to like what you want to do, but you're not like bedridden. But so it's like, all right, what can we do confidently and being able to build that confidence so that we can actually like make that switch like psychologically too, not
Mhm.
like going into an entry point because it's like okay you're a very fit individual and we do something that's like two steps down from doing the activities that you want to do that are causing pain. Like if it is still like causing pain, like it's or at least like to a level that you're still concerned, like that's not like what we need to go for. You just like you need to be confident in what you're doing.
Mhm.
uh so like that's where it comes from like a rehab standpoint or even training is finding the entry point that's saying like hey like I can confidently do this without pain and so and steadily build up from there rather than just and I think like also too like you like people do have to like kind of go through the kind of the exercise of saying like hey like pain isn't a forever thing, and saying and really like I mean I talk to this with patients a lot because I was like I love this is saying like and like really working like through those things of hey this isn't the end all be all, like you like giving them like the confidence to move and the confidence in themselves or and like really actually like going into just like all right like how's your life on the outside of things, like if it is like if it is very stressful or there are things that you don't necessarily like enjoy, or uh just life, like you just like, you're in a valley. It's like, okay, like those things, like, I mean, it's a good time to get those things in line too, so that like they also don't like affect your pain levels, because they definitely do.
Oh yeah, there is such a psychological component to pain just in general with kind of how we're feeling and the emotions that we're feeling. And that certainly affects everybody a little bit differently, like some, much more than others, as we know. But even yeah, like just, if you have so if you have gone through, an injury and you are starting, some of the rehab programs or training again, is there kind of like a percentage that you like to think in terms of like, hey, I'm gonna push the tissue like 20% more today. Like I'm still maybe I feel it. Maybe it's not pain free. Maybe I feel it a little bit, but like when would I stop with that?
Yeah. So whenever it's like, when addressing just like any activity or even just rehab movements, it was like we have our pain scale from 1 to 10. Um, one being like, it's like basically it's not there. 10 being, okay, you want to, saw your arm off. So it's like you have this whole spectrum, and I also like, and so pain will like, discomfort will be present, and to a certain extent, because like we do have to load those tissues, and if we haven't had exposure, or like you've said, like the body has like perceived this pain for a little bit, it will be there. But if I always tell patients, if it on that scale, if it's a 3 or below of any dull, achy, or tightness sensation, that's a-okay. And I describe a 3 out of 10. We like here in Charlottesville, Virginia, we're a very hike centric area. And we say, like, hey, if you're going on a hike and you're enjoying yourself, but you hear bees off in the distance because you're in nature, like obviously they're going to be flying around. So, okay, you hear them, but that's a-okay. It's like, oh, all right. Like that's a 3. Like you notice it, but like you're still enjoying what you're doing. Like like you still want to go continue the hike. But if it is any sharp or stabbing pain, or a dull, achy, or tightness sensation that is above a 4 plus, then it's like, okay, it's like either it's like we're just done with that exercise for the day. Oh, we can't do that weight, but it's like, all right, like this is like well, a do not pass go. And I typically like say, like, you are like at the gym. It's like, all right, if you feel that for more than 3 consecutive reps, or like with running, you feel it for more than like 10 consecutive steps. It's like, okay, like maybe we're not at the speed, or we can't handle like uphills or downhills, or whatever is like tip like bringing on the pain, or like how you like change the intensity of things. And that 4 plus out of 10, if we go back to our hiking analogy, is all right, the bees are now stinging you and you want to go in the
That is way more than a 4, but I'm just kidding.
no.
I'm just kidding. That's a
I
7.
so like maybe I was like that's like what my partner says. I like, so I would just say, like, okay, the bees are swarming you.
Mm,
Like, let's go with
yeah,
that one. Like
let's
the
go
bees
that. I'm
are
like, if
now,
bees stinging me,
yeah.
get
Like
them
I
the
would
hell
say
out
like
of
that's like probably like a 6 or a 7.
Yeah.
So okay, the bees are swarming you and they're not going away.
Yes.
And and you want to go in the car. Uh
Yes, and it's concerning.
yes, yes. Like that's when it's like, okay, like it's not like, okay, you can't do it. It's just like, okay, we push the intensity to like, like
Yeah.
we push the intensity too much, like on the set, or with the distance that we're running, or anything along those lines. And it's like, all right, like let's like either just like scale back the weight, scale back the like running intensity, and then just like stay there for the rest of the session. So that's a-okay. also from like those standpoints, if all right, say like you've gone through your training session, you're like, okay, like I had like, like I had that 3 or below out of 10, like yeah, 3 or below pain. I'm all good. The next day, if it's like the next day, you shouldn't like still feel like that dull achy tightness. Like it should have like gone away by like the next day if you felt it. If like you go into the next day and you're like, you woke up and you're like, man, it's like still like at like the same level. That's also like a thing of like, hey, like we just overdid it that day. And um because like but soreness is still, expected, especially if like you're reintroducing movements under load. Like always expect to be sore. Like I think people are just like, oh, like my body, like, you don't lose like a lot of strength over time, especially if you're still, still trying to improve it, even with like modifications that people have done. But it's like, I know with me, it's all right. Like I went like a little bit without squatting when like I hurt my knee. And then, but I still did like quad extensions and other things that still like tested my quads. But when I was like after like the first time I like back squatted, I was sore for like 2 weeks. Like so like soreness is still like, expected, but it's like the dull achy tightness or the sharper stabby pains that like we're looking for there.
Yeah, I love the 3 out of 10 because in my head I always kind of conceptualize it as like, okay, like let's push it like 30%. So that like that like lines up pretty nicely. Just because you do want to challenge the, the tissue or whatever it might be. But you know, whenever if someone's asking me like, hey, how should I get back into it? I'm always just like, push it a little bit. And then guess what? You can always push it more the next session. You know what I mean? Like we don't want to go so quick that, we are now out for like a week, and if instead, okay, we improved a little bit this session. Okay, a few days later, you hit this again. Okay, did I have, is this improving? Can I either, do more weight, do more reps, go for longer if it's, cardio based, whatever it might be. So, definitely take it slow, but also push yourself, if you are doing the right types of rehab exercises. And ideally you are seeing, potentially someone that you can work with, which perfect segue. We did create a fantastic guide called Redefine Low Back Pain. That is all Hannah's name. Like, I just gotta say that when you said that to me, because we had talked about this idea and like all this stuff, and then you hit me with that name, and I was like, oh, I just love a good name. I love a good name for things. And sometimes it's like the hardest part when you're creating something, you're like, what's gonna be the name? So Redefine Low Back Pain, and it is let's just talk a little bit about it in terms of kind of like the overall structure of it so people can have an understanding. And then, just understand, I guess, how the progressions work, why you picked some of the exercises and like all that.
Yeah, yeah. So I was like, our low back pain program. It's a 4 week program, 3 days a week. That you can. It was like that you can do like like every day of the week if you want. Like I say, like hey, like it's 3 days minimum, but if you want to like repeat that week, like on days like 2, 4, and 6, more than welcome to. But I created the plan because I feel like a lot of people, when it's like, okay, they do like, all right, maybe they did like, tweak their low back doing like, lifting something, or they do have like, they have this constant low back pain while running. A lot of people just like, all right, they rest and then they go back into it and it's still there. But like you said, it's not a lot of low back pain it's not like at the level of like, okay, I'm concerned that like something is really wrong and they need to go see somebody. But like it's impending, it's just like impeding them from doing the things that they want to do. So the 4 week program, it starts with just basic exercises that are built up to return them to lifting, return them to running. And I have all the exercises in there. Like you need very minimal equipment. Like a lot of them, like you just do like you do body weight, and it only takes 10 minutes or so. I did put in a 5-minute cardio warm up, but that's more so like I do want you like not to be going into this cold. I feel like a lot of people a lot of people do that, but I do want the blood flowing a little bit. Um but it's more so it's like I want this to be incorporated into your warm up, but not be your workout. So that's like what it's intended to be. It's to be like be your warm up or add it into your warm up to prepare you for things that you do like want to do. And then each week it progressively gets like the intensity goes up, the exercise complexity goes up, and then by week 4, you are like a lot of them are like loaded in some way and like really challenging. Ones that like even like I have a hard time doing sometimes. So it's and for, like with it, it's like I am hoping for people to just when they go into the workout, say they do have like they do the the program and then they go into their back squats, they build the confidence. They're like, oh man, like, all right, like, like while like warming up at the bar, I didn't. It's like, oh, I typically like feel like a little stiff. Oh, I feel better. Okay, let's add a little bit of weight, seeing how that feels. And then they can also like, steadily just build confidence and then progress in whatever they want to do, like back to what they want to do.
Yeah, and I love that, our whole intention was let's make this something that is time efficient, right? Because most people, a lot of times, I feel like with this kind of recovery stuff, it just seems so like it's so long and I gotta like take a bunch of time out of my day or whatever, and part of that's just like excuses, like, yes, but the other part of it is like it's just boring kind of stuff, you know what I mean? So it's like, hey, how do we do this to where it's like effective and it's helping us like get ready to do whatever movement or whatever training, or you can also just do this if you do have just like 10 minutes and you want to
Yeah.
just do it separately from lifting, totally, totally possible too. But yeah, wanted to make it, around 10 minutes or so, minimal equipment, and there's video links for every single exercise in there so you guys have a total understanding of exactly what to do. And yeah, I'm just super excited for it because I feel like it's something that a lot of people again have this kind of nagging back pain that's just like annoying, and they know they should do some things but they don't necessarily know what to do or who to go to, because sometimes, I've had plenty of people who decide to go to like a physical therapist and sometimes they have an amazing, time, and other times they're like, this was literally such a waste, so it's going to be really hit or miss. And that's with everything in life, right? Like any kind of practitioner that you're going to go see, sometimes you like them, sometimes you don't, just kind of the way that it goes. But this is something that you can do self-led, self-paced. Use this to start and then use this as a gauge to see, hey, am I improving? Like, is this like bulletproofing my low back? Have I had any improvements? Or, like you said kind of earlier in the podcast, if you haven't really seen any kind of market improvements, like a 30% improvement over 4 to 6 weeks, well, then maybe it's time to go seek some other, testing or other kind of treatment. But this can be a really great place to start. So we'll definitely have that linked in the show notes for you guys. But yeah, anything else on low back pain? I feel like we covered like so many different facets. Like we did a lot.
Yeah, no, we definitely covered a lot. No, nothing sticks out. I think it's, like with like I mean this with any pain in general. Like I just want people to know like I don't like pain shouldn't stop you from doing the things you do. So if anything, like if it's like I think that rest can be valuable if someone is just like overtraining and just not eating right, not sleeping right. They don't have those things dialed in. But I don't think if those things are dialed in, rest is typically not the answer. There's something that is like that there's something that just needs to be dialed a little bit more like into like the movement that you're doing, whether it's like okay we need to incorporate like a better warm up, or if like even by doing those things, or get finally just like going to somebody to get like to be assessed to make sure that yeah, there like isn't like anything like, more significant going on, but don't rest, and then to just don't think that pain is just going to be there forever. And it's just like, oh, I've hit the age that, okay, like I just experience pain on a daily basis. Like, no, like you, like, pain is a part of life, but it shouldn't like be there like all the time. And it doesn't mean like it's like there like for the rest of your life. So it's like pain will be present, but it's not supposed to be present like all the time.
Yeah, chronically. And I think that was a really good point though. Like a lot of times we don't do the right things. And again, I'm just as guilty of this sometimes too. Like we don't do the right things and then we think that rest is the answer and then we just get right back into our training where it's like, "Hey guys, if you are probably of the age, if you're listening to this podcast, where you probably need to take your warm-ups more seriously." I've had a lot of clients who are like, "Am I like finally at the?" I'm like, "Yeah, we're finally the age where we can't just like go in and like just like fuck shit up in the gym anymore. Like we have to do a few things for a few minutes beforehand. Like all of the boring things, like they really matter." So like I said,
Yeah.
we will put the redefine low back pain guide in the link here for the show notes if you guys are interested. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to message myself or Hannah. And for all other inquiries about coaching or consulting or one-on-one movement analyses, because you also do offer those, you can visit redefinehealthybrands.com, and we will talk to you guys next week.